Hey there, Fellowship family. You are listening to a channel created for the church in Winchester, Virginia, and beyond, purposed to encourage, inspire, and equip you to love God and love others more and more. I'm Mark Francis, your host for today, and with me at the round table today is William Orth. Hey, William.
Hey, Mark.
How are you?
Good.
Awesome. Well, glad you're here. Excited to dig into more topics here in our focus of identity and sexuality. And just, by the way, remember that there is a video version of this podcast on YouTube that maybe you can be watching us, but also you can subscribe for an audio version and listen to podcasts however you typically listen to podcasts. Do you listen to podcasts, William?
I do.
You don't. I don't. Sorry. This is the first for you.
I'll listen to this one.
Okay. Excellent. Share it with others. But we release this particular channel on Fridays. This is the family channel for Fellowship. We also have Sermon Spotlight podcast and also a global church podcast channel that you can listen to. Well, you know, we're here with William today. You are a single man.
Yes.
Yes? Yes. And we've been engaging in conversations leading to this point in our podcast focus of the identity sexuality focus, kind of getting into biblical foundations of what is the biblical perspective of how God has called us to live. Mm-hmm. And over the last couple of weeks, we've heard kind of a unique design for women and also a unique design for men, where it's kind of setting the tone for where God has specifically called men and women to live, mostly within marriage. And so here, I just flat out ask, are you single? Because that's one of the unique characteristics of who you are and why you're here with us today. So we're going to kind of call this segment and a couple other segments that we'll be releasing in the next few weeks, kind of living out your sexuality. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you about this because you have really a unique experience. And I just want to share that you did share your experience with our church this past Sunday with your family. Mm-hmm. And so for those of you that are listening that weren't at church, you can feel free to go back and watch that sermon or listen to that podcast. But I would just love to just have you maybe give us a recap of what is your story, what's your kind of almost testimony, if you want to call it that. And then I think from what you did this past Sunday, a lot of more questions probably than even answers came. Yeah. That's some of the feedback that we've gotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'd love to kind of dive into some of those questions. But just give us kind of your story, introduce yourself of how long you've been at church and kind of what's led you to this point.
Okay, great. So like you said, my name is William Orth, and I originally started with my family at FBC. I think it was the summer of 1995. We began attending. I think I was in the 7th grade. So it became our church home. Both my parents are very active in the church, as well as all of my other family members that still live here in Winchester. And so, yeah, FBC would definitely be what I would have called my church home as a child. My story, as I had kind of led into on Sunday, it really starts for me in the 5th grade. It's where most kids are starting to develop their attractions and figure out, you know, what their likes and dislikes are, you know, as far as sports, girls, boys, all the things.
Right.
So for me, it's when I first realized something was a little different about me. The other boys in the grade were starting to become attracted to girls, and I realized that I was becoming attracted to the boys. Now, unlike what we're doing now at Fellowship, sexuality in general was not really discussed in my childhood.
Right.
I mean, this is the mid-90s, early 90s, mid-90s, and it was in the world, but it was not talked about in my family, and it wasn't really talked about here at Fellowship or really most churches. So I knew something was different, but I didn't really know what it was at the time. But I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody because it just didn't seem to fit the norm. So I figured it out on my own over the course of I don't remember exactly how long, but eventually I was able to put a label on it that these feelings were gay, homosexual, and it was kind of an aha moment. I had something to reference this to.
So as a teen,
Yeah.
in the church, kind of what were some of the struggles or wrestlings internally? Because you were saying that you didn't verbalize that
Right.
with people. Kind of what were some of the things that you were thinking? I mean, you obviously were a Christian. You grew up in a Christian home. You accepted Christ as your Savior. You're going to church. You're hearing teachings, but yet you're realizing there's something different there.
Yeah.
Like, what was some of the internal struggles that maybe you were feeling?
I mean, everything that I heard really from society, it was all just negative. You'd hear derogatory words for gay and lesbian people thrown around on the television, or sometimes from someone in your immediate family or your immediate friend circle, and so it would always put my guard up that, someone said queer or someone said fag, and that's like, all right, that must be bad. But I had learned, those are words associated
Right.
with these feelings, these attractions, these questions that I was having. So I was like, all right, well, that's bad. It's from someone's eyes, so I need to just not let this out.
I guess partly of my question also is that we just gone through this at least month of January where we have this kind of biblical foundations of what has God called us to live. So were there any internal struggles of where you were recognizing what was right, what was wrong, what was sin, what wasn't a sin? Kind of, did you have those kind of questions in your head at the time?
Yeah, I mean, as a child, as a teen, I think definitely my spiritual maturity was not what it is now.
Good. Good.
But I knew right from wrong. I knew, I conceptually knew that homosexuality was a sin, but I couldn't reconcile where I was, having not sought it, to what do I do with it? Where's the sin line, almost? And yeah.
So then you graduate from high school. You still live in town.
Yeah.
You are
So-
still a part of the church.
Right.
Where
So
does it lead from there?
I went away for a year to college, and then I came back and went to community college here. And that time I became involved with leading and serving in the church. I was helping John Avery at the time with the high school students youth group, leading a youth group. And so I was walking that Christian line. I was living the life. I was, almost like the picture of the good Christian single boy. Like,
Sure.
And I had not done anything with my sexuality at that time. I had attempted to date a few girls here and there. Sometimes it was to keep up an image, or see if I could change this, or stop some bullying or something like that. But it was never true for me. It always felt like a lie. So I was honestly content just being single for a minute or two, and an opportunity. I don't know, there might be a better word for that, but a situation presented itself where someone very close to my age just walked up to me one day while I was at college and asked me out on a date. And it was a guy, obviously. And I remember being appalled. And I was just like, I don't know what gave you the impression. I'm not gay. I'm not homosexual. I don't, please don't ask me out.
Right.
And, he was like, okay, well, when you want to talk about that, my door is open. And I just remember sitting on that for like days, still just caught off guard of the audacity of someone. But in my mind, I was like, okay, well, he knows, like, something about you is making this known in public. And I started getting worried almost. So I did. I went and met with him, talked with him and talked about struggles of, growing up in Winchester, Frederick County area in the South, and Christian homes. What do you do with parents and yada, yada. And it was almost like a sounding board of someone else who had gone through a similar situation with me. And it opened a door. And at that point I walked through the door, started in a dating relationship with him. All the while I'm still at church, and helping with the youth group and serving and attending church. And I did that. I kind of kept up both of these sides for a couple of years. And I tried to almost see if I could have both worlds. I kind of ignored, didn't really look at or read about anything in the Bible of, what it was saying about what I was doing, and didn't really share with any of the people in the gay community that I was in, that I was a Christian. So I really just kind of built a river, if you will, between the two lands and just hopped back and forth.
How would you classify your relationship with God in that moment?
It's an interesting question. I think I loved God. I think I loved Jesus. And I think I wanted to serve him. But I don't think he was a presence in my heart anymore. I think he was slowly becoming replaced with what I was doing and what I was living. And as much as he was present in my life, like I could lead a youth group on a Wednesday night and know all the answers and teach the lesson and be the model Christian. And then I'd walk out the door and I'd meet up with a gay friend or something of that nature. And, so it was almost like I was two people. And I think that ultimately is what wore me down. Because we can only be one person.
Well, I'll even push pause there because I just appreciate you sharing this already. And we're going to dive into even more things. But just when you say that, it makes me realize that the struggles that you were struggling with same-sex attraction, something that we can kind of classify that with that term, and living a double life, isn't just something that gay Christians are struggling with.
Not at all.
I mean, you can classify and label any sin, any kind of double lifestyle, and it could be found within the church.
I mean, I think, and I don't want to say all of us,
sure,
but I would say there's probably a good portion of us that are one person at work or one person at school and a different person at church, or maybe even someone different within a family. But then when we get to church, I'm going to put this face on. I mean, that's literally what I was doing. This is what people want to see from me. They want to see, the good Christian 24-year-old, living his life for Jesus. And I mean, to be honest, I don't know that we really sometimes want to hear the struggle. So it's not, yes, my story is linked to sexuality and homosexuality, but we all have that period of time we may or may not have put up a facade or lived two lives.
Great reminder, because we are in the middle of the sermon series in the book of Romans, and we're just digging into this Romans 1, where it shares that, we all have suppressed the truth for the lie. And that we have turned our backs on God from that standpoint. So to classify one sin over another kind of really becomes challenging when many of us have and could have this double life.
Well, one thing I really appreciated from Mark here a couple of weeks ago, when he was reading those verses, which we haven't quite gotten to in the sermon series, where it lists out, sin after sin after sin after sin. And some of them sound rough to our, to our ranking lists, if you will. But he's like, I assure you, you're all in that list. Himself, all of us, we have committed something on this list, and that was a yes moment for me, almost like a I don't know that a win is the right word, but I've a lot of my life I've felt mine's worse.
Yeah.
And Mark did a great job of saying, yes, the homosexuals in this list, and yes, I can't remember the whole list. If you pull it up,
you look at it. I mean, it goes down the list.
Wickedness and greed, but
evil, envy,
we're all
murder,
in there.
strife. But then it gets to gossips, and insolent, arrogant, boastful. Okay, yeah, I think I might be boastful. Sure. Disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. I mean, we're right here in Romans 1:30-31, and you can look at that list as you follow along with this podcast right here. That is hard hitting, and we all truly have fallen short of the glory of God.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
Romans shares. So I just want to encourage you from that standpoint that you're sharing your personal story.
Right.
This is living out our sexuality kind of podcast, but it's so relevant to any of us. And on Sunday, you weren't not alone on stage. You had your parents with you.
Right.
So kind of dive into the family aspect of where we are in the story right now, of how you're kind of living this double life, and then where does that take you with your family?
Yeah. So I came out to my family in the spring of 2007. I want to say April, but it's been a few years, so my memory's not as good as it was. But came out to my whole family, different family, different methods. One of my sisters lives in Pennsylvania, and everybody else lives here in the Winchester-Frederick County area. But came out to all of them. Was just kind of like, hey, this has been my struggle for 13 years, I think, at that point. But I can't really live a lie anymore. So I'm gay, and it's kind of was like, here it is in your lap now.
How did that go?
I mean, I think I had tried to prepare myself as much as possible for, like the spiral effect. And the thing is, like, it's almost like the devil and the angel on the shoulders, I had my hope, so it wasn't really a person, but the hope of, maybe your family will be okay, this will go well, but everyone over here in the world, in the gay community that I was already out to, is like, yo, your family's gonna hate you, they're gonna disown you. And like, so I had prepped myself for kind of like doomsday prep, if you will. For like worst case scenario. I mean, even to the fact I was, before I came out, I was living with one of my siblings. I moved out of their house just from a fear standpoint of, if I get kicked out, I better have a place to live.
Wow.
I was actually working for another member of my family and was like, well, I should probably get another job because, I might lose my job. Were those the right decisions? I'm not sure, but that's kind of the mentality that I was in of, you need to prep yourself for the worst case scenario. It was hard. My parents didn't know what to do. I can remember my mom saying, well, I don't accept this. And I'm like, well, you don't really got a choice to accept it.
Yeah.
But that was a reaction out of, I didn't realize it at the time, but I had 13 years to come to grips with this. They had 13 minutes, to come to grips to it. So it was a shock to their system that I didn't really understand at the time. There was a lot of, at that time, is there a gay gene? That was a big thing in society. And so, members of the family were questioning, well, if you're gay, am I gay? And so dealing with some of that stuff.
So how do you answer that?
Oh gosh,
today, not the science of it, but I mean, just the tendency that society has this kind of homophobia, or I touch you, something's going to rub off, or I'm in the same family, or oh, he served in the youth group, and is that going to rub off on my children? How do you answer these questions?
I mean, comically, I'll say it's not contagious.
Okay. Okay.
So
That's a good start.
yeah. I don't really get a lot into nature nurture. I've talked at a couple of conferences with some other speakers, and they don't either. I think it's kind of like a perfect storm. You know, different familiar relationships. You know, there's some stereotypes out there of, you know, a strong-willed mother, and my mom did say she was strong-willed on Sunday, so I get a pass at that.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, if it's a distant father, you know, my dad worked a lot. He was our sole breadwinner. So he was oftentimes at work. You know, I wasn't into sports. So, you know, there was stereotypes and things that kind of fit in, you know, as far as a gene. You know, I don't think there's necessarily a gene. I don't want to get into the scientifics, but
I'm not a medical person, so we're not going to go there. Have no fear.
But for me, what I will say is the attraction wasn't a choice. And it's interesting. I'm actually glad you brought it up, because I can remember when I was full-blown living in my lifestyle choice. I was having a conversation with a few of my gay friends, and I remember asking one of them and said, "Well, if you could be heterosexual right now, would you?" He's like, "Absolutely."
Really?
And I said,
Yeah.
So you don't think you chose this either? He's like, "Absolutely not." And I remember him looking at me just square in the face like I'm looking at you, and say, "Why would I choose this?" He's like, "This is hard." You know, we like to think that society loves this, you know, and to some degree they elevate it, but it's still a hard life. It's not a norm. There's discrimination everywhere, and especially, you know, kind of where we live, and then as you go further south, you know, it kind of gets a little bit worse. We're not a major metropolitan area, so you know, it's not. It wasn't something I asked for. No more than the prideful person, for instance, to go back, you know, asks for that propensity to be boastful, or that propensity to gossip, or the propensity to drink, or whatever it is.
That's our sin nature coming out.
Exactly.
Whatever the propensity is for me might be different than for you.
Right.
But in God's eyes, we still have one.
Yeah.
In God's eyes, it still is falling short of where He's called us to live.
Yeah.
And you just happen to have this propensity to have this attraction.
Right.
And yet each one of us can have a different attraction. But even so, okay, so maybe you didn't quite know it as much at that time than you do now. Walk me through what those years were like when you were out and when you were living it out. You know, that would be maybe some would consider kind of your moments away from God.
Sure.
You know, so walk me through what that was like for you, and obviously there's light at the end of the tunnel, so we can get to the hope and the end.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, okay.
There is.
But I want to kind of hear kind of where you were personally in those years as well.
I mean, when I came out, I did ultimately end up leaving the church. And for all intents and purposes, my family for most of the case. It just was easier to avoid church and avoid family than to try to engage in it. It was always a 800-pound gorilla that nobody ever wanted to talk about.
Right. Yeah.
So I was really content just walking away and doing what I was going to do. You know, I dated, there was relationships here and there. Ironically, looking back, nothing ever fulfilling. I think for me, you know, everybody as a kid is like, sees that picture of, oh, you know, one day I'm going to have a wife, 2 kids, a puppy, you know, white picket fence, and, you know, 2.3 acres or whatever, whatever that American dream thing is. So when I realized, okay, well, you have homosexual attractions, so that picture is not going to be attainable. So then I'm like, all right, well, maybe I can have the Hollywood picture that, you know, you would see in People Magazine or in the TV shows or in the movies. I was like, all right, well, I'll just trade the wife for a husband, and we could adopt or whatever. And I'm like, surely that's out there. I see this on Hollywood,
but ultimately you're saying it's not fulfilling.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't out there, and the relationships were void. I mean, it just, and I know now, as I've come back to Christ, that it's because those relationships were void of him,
right?
Void of his presence. But my life was still at that moment. And I think one of the greatest things for me was I had people in my life that didn't give up. I started to become really, really connected to a church in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I think God used that almost as a catalyst to work in my life. I pretty instantly built a wall probably 20 feet high and all the way around me to keep Christians out and to keep God out. I was really done. And so I can kind of look back now at life and see where God was like chiseling away at the mortar between the bricks of, just somebody, giving me a hug if I'd come back to fellowship, who I was like, surely that person hates me, and just saying, I love you. My sister, who's also a strong-willed individual in Pennsylvania, like my mom. And so she had a rule. She was like, if you're going to come stay for the weekend with me, you're going to go to church. So if you're sleeping in my house on Saturday night, you're going to church Sunday morning.
Good for her.
And I remember like telling her at the beginning, fine, well, you can make me sit there, but I'm not going to listen. And like literally, like if I do a flyover of my life for 5 years, like I can remember sitting with my arms crossed, like the first X number of visits. And then like slowly you can see the arms uncross and go down by your side. It was God doing that. He was opening up my ears, opening up my heart, and just using common people, using everyday common Christians to show me love, to ultimately a point where I was sitting on a hammock talking to a pastor and saying, what's different? Why are you so nice to me? I think that was literally what my word was. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was just like, well, you love me. Like, do you not know what I'm doing? And I asked her that, like bold-faced, and said, she's like, I've known since the day I met you, what you were doing and how you were living. And she said, but I am called to show you love and to show you love and truth. And she read to me the Ephesians 4:15 passage, which is speaking the truth through love. And there's some more before and after it, but that's a paraphrase. And it just struck me. And I was like, so you really do love me in spite of this? And she's like, yes. And I said, and God really still loves me in spite of this? And she's like, yes. And I was like, all right, wow. Like it was almost like a light bulb was going off. And it's interesting that moment was in the summer. And by that following winter, I had stopped dating.
Wow.
I'd stopped dating men. I didn't consciously know it at the time. But I just ended a relationship, and I was like, I'm done. I don't need this anymore. Like I said, it wasn't fulfilling.
So kind of a slow progression back towards God.
Right.
But what a great picture of God working in your life through others.
Right.
Through other people. And here at Fellowship Bible Church, we kind of have this phrase called authentic fellowship, where it's fellowship meaning not just talking about the weather, not just, hey, what did you eat last night or whatever, but digging into somebody's life to then challenge you in that moment. Yeah. She might not have been a perfect stranger, but you didn't know her for that long.
Right.
And able to speak truth to you, to plant a seed, at least to get you back towards the right path.
So the bigger aha moment, I call it when I reclaimed my faith. My mom likes to refer to it as my second redemption, as she said on Sunday. So there's a plug, Mom. I was sitting in a church service, and the pastor was teaching on corporate giving, and the title of the sermon was "I'm Not Done Yet." And I remember sitting down, and I was like, "Oh, it's on tithing, on offering, like, oh." And as he started speaking, I just started having a conversation with God, and I heard God say, "I'm not done with you yet," and it was personalized. And I was just like, what? And it's like, "I'm not done with you yet, William. I have a plan for you. I have a purpose for you. I love you." All of the edifying things just flooded into my mind and in my heart. I mean, it was one of those goosebumps shiver moments.
Wow.
And I remember crying. I'm crying by the time the message was over. My brother-in-law was actually sitting next to me. He was the only one that was with me, and he's an introvert and a little shy, and he was like, "What is wrong with you? Why are you crying over a corporate giving message?"
Right.
And I was just like, "I think I should probably go talk to my sister." And he was like, "Yeah, I think you probably should." And I remember going up to her and finding her, and tears just streaming down my face. And she was helping with children's ministry, and they kind of do the same thing that the big church does.
Okay.
So she's like, "Why are you crying over corporate giving?" And I told her, I said, "God's not done with me yet." And she's like, "Yeah, I know, William. God's not done with you yet." And I'm like, "No, like I'm ready. I'm ready for him. I'm ready to live my life for him." Well, she lit up, just absolutely lit up, and was like, "Okay, all right. Well, we gotta talk about this." So I remember talking with a pastor friend the following day and saying, "Okay, like, this is what happened yesterday, and how do I live my life now?" Like,
Right.
And I was kind of like, "Okay, I'm at another crossroad, and what do I do at this crossroad?" The first one was I chose to live my lifestyle, in 2007. Now it's 2012. And I'm like, "What do I do here?" And he kind of looked at me and like, "Well, what do you mean? What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I've stopped having relationships with men. It's been 5 months. And I don't need that. I don't have a desire for that." And that was kind of when I realized that for the first time.
Interesting.
Was that I was like, "Oh, well," and I realized God had already taken that away. And I'm like, "How incredible." And I said, "So I don't have this need. I'm not pursuing that." I said, "But, boil it down, I still have this attraction." I said, "I still, if I were to pursue this, it would be with a man and not with a woman." So I'm like, I don't know how to reconcile.
Because maybe what you've heard your whole life leading up to it, you might not have had any thought, but either you're out and you're gay, or you're straight or you're in a church.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's yes. That's boil it down. And so he looked at me, kind of smiled, and he was like, "You can still live your life for God if you have this attraction. You might have that for the rest of your life. God might take that away, but he might not. But you can choose to walk in him and live your life for him versus for yourself." And I was like, "Really? Like I can just do that? I can not act upon this, and God will be good." And he was like, "Yeah." And so for me, that's how I've lived my life. It is denying self, to live a life closer to Christ. It's not always easy, but from that moment, that's what I've decided to do.
Because what we do know, scriptures call us to live, pure, and kind of something that has been bantered around church in this focus already. Just the idea that if you're not married, you're called to be pure,
Right.
Called to be celibate, and then if you're married, you're called to be monogamous,
Right.
Essentially, just with your spouse, and so. How does that really play out in your life today?
Yeah.
Knowing, okay, that is the biblical call, knowing you have these attractions, and yet you it seems like that light bulb moment you had with that pastor in Pennsylvania, and you're like, okay, I have this other option now. I feel like I have these tendencies. However, I can still live a biblical model. Kind of what does that look like on a day-to-day basis for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, it boils down to celibacy. I mean, but it's, as I said earlier, God is not looking at homosexuality different. It's in the same list of sins as everything else, but how it's lived out in my life now is different. It's like heterosexuality, but a little bit worse because I am unable to pursue anything. Like, you can't, a single heterosexual man would be able to date, and potentially get married. For me right now, I can't do that. Right. My attraction is towards a guy, so I can't have that. So for me, it was, how can I keep from being lonely when I'm alone? And for me, it's community. Okay. It's Christ-centered community.
Yeah.
I tried to do it alone. I'm like 52-48 introvert extrovert.
Okay.
So I
might have you beat there.
Yeah, probably. But so I like to be alone, and for a lot of my life I was content in that, but I didn't realize I had the external relationships, external dating. So when that was gone, I'm like, I need to fill that. So I intentionally began rebuilding my relationships with my family that had become broken, and I developed a core group of friends, Christian friends, majority Christian friends that knew me before, knew me during, and now knew me after, and can support. When I came back to fellowship in 2016, I joined your community group.
Yeah, which I appreciate because I'll admit that yes, my wife and I knew you before, and then from my perspective, you went MIA.
Right,
you're gone. I think there's years where we didn't see each other or chat.
Yeah.
And then one day I get a call from the church saying, "Hey, there's this guy, William Orth. He's looking around for community groups, yours or somebody else's." I was like, "I'll take him.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah,
bring it." And what you bring and add to our group enhances our group from your perspectives, and I hope that we can then also bless you.
Yeah, absolutely.
From bringing that.
So I think for me that is it. It's okay, so you're alone. You might be alone for the rest of your life. Who knows? God does, but not me, not anybody else. But how do you still have a fulfilling life? And it's one thing I appreciate about our community group is it's diverse. Which was why you were on the list to be picked. And I've listened to a couple of nationwide speakers like Rosario Butterfield or Christopher Yuan, who's coming this coming Sunday. And I got to speak in November with Gary Ingram, and they all hammer in this idea of community. Because so many times we just want to be with who is like us.
Right.
If you're single, sometimes we're like, hey, we have a singles group. If you're married, if you're married in your 20s, well, let's find other married in our 20s. If you've got two kids, ages 5 and 7, you're looking for other families with kids of 5 and 7. If you're retired, you're looking for other retired people. And that is great. There's value in that. I'm not knocking that, but there's value in diversity. There's value in community.
Right.
And I think that would be one of my standing points, if you will, of what I would ask the church to do, is to step up and maybe step out of your comfort zone,
right,
and embrace the other people that are a little bit different, that don't fit your mold, maybe.
Yeah, and don't fit your mold. But I also, since you've come to our group, have had just a greater passion and desire to engage in single people's lives. Just the difficulty that there is of not having a full companion every day of the week, and then even taking it to the next level of where you are with your attractions and kind of that long-term bent. Now, we're not having this conversation to make us feel sorry for you.
No, absolutely not.
I
have a great life, for the record.
You have a great life. But I will ask you, let me ask you the question that you asked your friends when you were living that lifestyle. Do you wish that you could be quote unquote normal? Do you wish that you could somehow become attracted to women?
I appreciate the quotes because I don't like to think
Those
I'm
are
not normal.
air quotes
Those are
for
air
people
quotes for
listening.
people, who can't see. That's probably the number one toughest question that anyone's ever asked, and so I will answer it for me.
Perfect. That's why we're here. This is your perspective
for where I am. So when I reclaimed my faith, I don't remember if it was the same day or the same week or same month, but it was in that general time frame. I remember I prayed. I prayed to God and I said, okay, God, this is what I'm choosing now. I'm choosing you over me. If it be your will for me to be attracted to women instead of men, I pray that you do that. If it's not your will, then I pray that you give me the strength to live this life as you called me to live, from now until you call me home. And it was sincere. And like I said, I prayed it once and I haven't prayed it since. People have asked me, well, why are you not still praying that? And so I have an interesting answer for that.
Good.
Because I say, well, for me, if I were to pray that every day, it's almost like I'm saying to God, what you've done is not enough. So the fact that he has taken me out of that life that I was in for 7 years, given me the friends, the family, the church, the community that I have now, it's like, thanks God for what you've did, but can I have a little bit more? Thanks for the bowl of ice cream, but where's my cherry?
Yeah. Wow. Right.
And, it's like Paul says, the thorn in my side. This might be the thorn in my side. If it is, I know God will give me what I need to live this. And yeah, so that's
great, because you're content in where God has placed you, not desiring something that might not be attainable.
Right.
And I think that can resonate with any of us, with any of our difficulties and struggles that we face.
Yeah. And I think, you said it and I said it, it's content. Sometimes the world, I have a couple of non-Christian friends, they're like, well, you're not happy. Are you happy? And it's a tough concept because the world, society wants you to be happy. I mean, that's, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sure. But that's not biblical. That's not in the Bible. The Bible asks me to have joy and to be content. I have joy. I have the joy of the Lord, and I'm content. I mean, just actually a few minutes ago, I ran into someone and they're like, "Are you lonely?" I'm like, I'm not lonely. Like, I'm really not lonely. I mean, you can't see the smile that is on my face if you're not watching it, but it's like, I'm not lonely. Yeah. I might be alone, but that's it. I think, we haven't touched on this, but I live with a family.
Okay. Right. Yep.
Because, they are they don't have an immediate family here in the Winchester area. They're kind of transplants from New York and Tennessee, and just became friends with them a couple of years ago, 5 or 6. And I got to a point where I realized living alone wasn't healthy for me. It opened me up a little bit to temptation, and just wasn't positive for me. And so I reached out to them and I said, "Hey, I want to come live with you." And they're like, "Okay." And
great.
they literally embodied community.
Yeah.
And now they have 2 kids, and
And are you changing diapers?
Nope. I draw the line at diapers. But I'm those kids' uncle. I mean, we are family. So when you get home, you get to download to your wife and kids what your day was. Well, I get to download to Brian and Megan and their twins.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have this picture. Like I had this picture, like I said earlier, when I was 8, 9, 10, who knows, of what life would look like. But, sometimes God can give you a greater picture than what you can imagine as a kid.
Yeah.
And I personally think I have a pretty good one.
That's great.
Yeah.
We are wrapping up our time here, but there is probably even more questions that we could answer, even an entire extra podcast. But I'd like to touch on something just to kind of shift gears a little bit, knowing that this is your story, and kind of giving us your perspective of how you're interpreting Scripture and how you're interpreting your attractions. When do you feel like that you're crossing the line? Because as you mentioned, you can't get married.
Right.
You need to be celibate.
Right.
But how are you recognizing when you may be falling into a sinful trap, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I think I do. The line is attraction versus action. So my attraction is what my attraction is, just like yours is. But choosing not to act on that attraction is for me where the line is. Just like an alcoholic, you don't take an alcoholic to the bar. You don't take a gambler to the casino.
Right.
I don't go to some of the gay scenes, the gay clubs or whatever it may be. I don't put myself in the same situations that I was when I was living in that lifestyle. So for me, it's literally simply attraction versus action, not pursuing, not living that out.
That's great.
Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just a couple of kind of follow-up questions on that. When you look at the world's perspective,
sure,
and how proud people can be when they come out, and how that is celebrated, and they are essentially identifying themselves as a homosexual or a transgender person or a bisexual. I mean, all these words that are out there in the world today. How do you define who you are right now? Right. As a world might call themselves gay or homosexual. Do you identify in any kind of capacity like that?
Well, and again, we're in the middle of this focus: identity and sexuality, a biblical perspective. So my identity is only in Christ. I'm a son of God. I mean, that is my identity. The problem is the world.
Sure.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, because the world doesn't know Christ, so they don't understand. What do you mean your identity is in Christ? Because their world's identity is in all of these other things. Whatever, as we've been talking about in the focus, their identity is in their job or their marriage or their familia status or where they were born, and
now sexual orientation.
Sure, now sexual orientation. And for me, when I came out, my identity was my sexual orientation. Absolutely. I mean, I embraced it with open arms, and now. That's not my identity. It's no more than my hair is brown, or that I'm white, or that I'm single. None of those things define William. Those are just things that make up William. The makeup of me, the characteristics of me. So if someone backs you and me into a corner and is like, what's your sexual orientation, or what's your, sexuality, or do you like boys or girls? It doesn't happen often, but if it does happen, I'm like, okay, well, my attraction is still same sex or homosexual or gay, whatever. But it's a difference of that term, having power in my life.
Right.
Right. For 7 years, it had power in my life. It doesn't have that power anymore. I don't give it that power. God took that power away. It used to be a noun that defined me. Now it's an adjective that just simply describes one part of me. A part of me that God may someday change.
Right.
Who knows? But it doesn't have to be everything that you are. It's not everything that I am.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that when you use the word identity in the world, it is going to be something of the world.
Right.
And here we're merging in our focus definition and our focus kind of title, trying to understand and rationalize the world's version of identity, but then know our firm identity, our satisfaction is in Christ. Absolutely. And in Christ alone. And that's what makes us, essentially, and that's what's giving you the power to overcome these attractions. Right. And as you recognize that, you had that moment where you're calling on God to say, hey, can you take these from me?
Right.
Or change me?
Right.
And you got your answer.
Right.
You found your identity, your true identity.
Absolutely.
Is now in Christ.
Absolutely.
Which is great. And I think that this particular, just our chat here is unique.
Yeah.
I mean, Fellowship Bible Church has never had these kind of chats before.
Right.
And I hope that others in other churches as well have more conversations like this. I even I think this past weekend from the stage in our worship service was momentous for FBC. Absolutely. Of having you and your parents up there, recognizing that, yes, this is a life change and a life moment. But it's not isolated. You're not the only person struggling with this here in our church or in our culture and society, wrestling with their relationship with Christ and with their attractions. But I think there is still work to be done in church at large, the global church, but also here at Fellowship Bible Church. So with this 3-month focus that we have, what hopes, what goals, what aspirations would you have that come out of this this time in the life of our body at Fellowship?
Yeah, and I think John Avery did a great job on Sunday talking about this is just one person's story. This is just my story, but everyone has a story, and God works through any sin to bring that follower back to him. So you might not be struggling with same-sex attraction or gender identity issues, but the story was the hope that, as I said on Sunday, I ran away from God. Absolutely. I ran far, but he was always there. I didn't always know he was there, but he was always there working. Yeah. So if it's a family member that has someone struggling in this sin or in any sin, really, is don't give up on God, because he's not giving up on you or that individual. Right. And to just have hope that God's timing is perfect, and his will ultimately be done. For Fellowship, I can't tell you how encouraging this focus has been. I mean, I know we're just at the beginning, but it's awesome that our church is tackling this, is doing this. And, as I said in the beginning of my testimony, it wasn't talked about in the 90s. For me in my life, it wasn't talked about. So if we can corporately talk about sensitive issues, uncomfortable topics, corporately, then we can do them in a small group setting. We had small group last night, and we were talking about this, and it's not anything we've ever talked about before. Right. So we're opening those doors of communication. So then you go from the corporate to the community to then into the home. I've been around your family when we've talked about some of these things, and some other families that I know that these are opening the doors for them to talk with their kids, for their kids to ask questions. So, whether you're 18 or 48 or 78, I think people can now start talking about this thing of identity and sexuality because we opened it up. I mean, that's the perfect thing about this focus.
And it's great. And I think you're right. It does start with just those conversations in the home, and then building and growing them to where we're not afraid of them. We're not ashamed of them. Right. So that way somebody like you in our society today, in the world today, in this time and place in FBC today, can find somebody to go to, or can find that there is answers beyond where their attractions and their struggles may be.
I mean, it plants the seed. It's just like when you're sharing the gospel. You're planting that seed. Somebody else is going to water that seed. You might water it. You might actually bring it to full growth, but you might not. So by this focus, we're planting those seeds. The seed I didn't have necessarily in 2007 when I first came out of saying, oh, there's another option, So by having this conversation, you and I on this podcast and in this focus, someone might realize there's another option. It might not keep them from going down a path. They might choose the action, as we said earlier, but that seed's planted in their mind that, there's not just one path.
Yeah. And God will still pursue.
Absolutely.
And according to your parents as well, don't, keep the prayer.
Never stop praying.
Never stop praying. And you're just a great example of how there is redemption. So I really, really appreciate you being here to have this chat.
Thank you.
There will be more chats in the future. And, we kind of mentioned the beginning of this podcast coming out of the sermon this past week where you were on stage for only a few moments. A lot of questions were there. Hopefully we answered some here today, but there may be others even after listening to this podcast and recording. And I just want to encourage anybody who is listening to go to our website where you can check out the fbcva.life/identity. There's spots where you can fill out any kind of questions. And if you are in the building, you can go to the home center and there's a little question and answer box. You can write on a little card, drop a note in there, because we do have even more events coming up in the future. I just want to give a couple of plugs. This coming weekend, Christopher Yuang is here for the sermon, and on Sunday after church, starting at 3:00, he's doing a more in-depth seminar on the church and homosexuality, and he's doing question and answer time as well. We have at FBC a panel for adults to attend February 26th, and then also a youth panel will be 2 weeks after that in March that Dennis McNutt, our youth pastor, will help oversee and have people on stage to answer questions and field kind of these more hard-hitting details that people might be really wondering what's going on with X, Y, and Z. And let's try to tackle those questions as best we can from a biblical perspective. Well, thank you again for being a part of the podcast, and just continue to tune into these, because we're going to, over the next several weeks, continue to unpack some more hard-hitting topics. But this concept of living out your sexuality as a single man, William, I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you,
You
Mark.
did a great job. And tune in again. Thanks for watching. And until we do chat again, let Christ be the focus of your life each and every day.
Amen.